Welcome to No Filter Doctor, where we cut through the health hype and dig into what's real, what works, and what's backed by evidence. I'm Dr. AK. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we have a very exciting topic. It is, which kind of cardiovascular exercise is best when we're trying to lose fat? This is something that came up when I was speaking with a patient. She was sharing with me that she wears these different metric devices, and it always shows zone 2 as the fat burning zone. So she has been spending a good portion of her exercise time in zone 2 when she's doing cardiovascular exercise. And I said, I hear you, but when you are doing a zone 5 or VO2 max workout, which by the way, we did a podcast on that, so you can go back and look at that, you are burning more calories overall. So if we're doing calories in versus calories out, which is usually how you get to weight loss, when you have a net negative of that leads to weight loss. So if you are burning more calories at a higher intensity of exercise, how is it that this low intensity is referred to as the fat burning zone? I was like, the math doesn't work out here. Let me look into this. And so today we're going to get into this. We're going to talk a little bit about zone 2. We're going to talk a little bit more about VO2 max. And then we're going to talk about what are the effects of these two different forms of cardiovascular exercise on our ATP production, oxygen utilization, and all of that fun nerdy stuff. But I will make sure not to lose my mind with the biochemistry of everything and keep it all in a way that actually makes sense. The first thing we need to address is, what is zone 2 and why is it called the fat burning zone? From a biochemical standpoint, zone 2 is that threshold where your body transitions from using primarily oxygen to make ATP and then starts to move to lactate to make ATP, and it can no longer clear that lactate efficiently. You'll start to get some lactate buildup. A lot of elite athletes and, high performance endurance athletes use lactate monitoring in order to determine what their zone 2 level of effort is. You might be shocked to find out that I, in fact, am not a high-level elite endurance athlete. I am a normal person who is just focused on longevity. So I do not own a lactate monitor to get these continuous levels to figure out what is my zone 2 level of output. I instead use the Maffetone 180 formula, and then I use my rate of perceived exertion. And this is what I do with my patients as well. So the Maffetone 180 formula came from Phil Maffetone. So that's M-A Foxtrot Foxtrot, E, T as in Tango, O-N-E formula, in case you want to look it up. You can go to his website too, which is philmaffetone.com, and it's on there. But this is basically, rather than starting with that traditional 220 minus your age that everybody uses for maximal heart rate, the Maffetone formula says use 180. Then there are other modifiers that you would either add or subtract depending on other aspects of your cardiovascular fitness. So we start with 180, you subtract your age. If you're recovering from a major illness, or you were in rehab, or you are overtraining, you would subtract 10 from that number, and that heart rate would be your goal zone 2 heart rate. Same thing if you're in really good condition, you might add another 5. And so it's kind of laid out really nicely on his website what you would add and subtract depending on your overall health. The other part of figuring out where your zone 2 is that rate of perceived exertion. And so a very easy exertion would be, you're just strolling in the park talking and everything is great. When you get to that kind of moderate intensity level of zone 2, there's something called the talk test, which means if you were with a friend, you could talk to them. I mean, they would know that you're exercising. You wouldn't have the same cadence and normal breath, but you would be able to talk to them. You would not, however, be able to sing to them if for whatever reason you were so inclined to bust out in song. I generally start with the Maffetone formula heart rate, in order to kind of figure out that target heart rate. And then I layer in that rate of perceived exertion. While it's nowhere near as accurate as lactate monitoring, it gives us a great starting point to figure out what heart rate are we looking for when we are in zone 2. Once you have that data, you can then hop on a stationary bike and see what output of energy you are producing at that heart rate. And that gives you your zone 2 output. So yes, it's a lot of math. This is something that I generally do in my office with my patients so that I can give them that number. And that's what we monitor over time. Like when they come in, we'll do yearly longevity assessments. And this is a measurement that we get every year, and we trend and see what direction we're going in. That zone 2 output gives me a good marker of the efficiency of their cardiovascular system. And it's a great measurement for me to determine what is their cardiovascular endurance. So where does this whole fat burning zone come into play? Zone 2 has been referred to as the fat burning zone because fat is the preferred substrate utilized for energy production at this level of exertion. In last week's podcast, we talked about lipids, and in that we went into details about cholesterol versus triglycerides. The triglycerides are what provide the fatty acid substrates to be used for energy in a process known as lipolysis. Well, lipolysis is the preferred pathway when we are at a zone 2 level of exertion. So a lot of people will see that fat burning zone on their watches or rings or whatever they're using and stay in that zone of exercise in order to burn fat. But this is where some confusion and controversy starts to creep in. The first issue is that almost all the data that we have about zone 2 training comes from studies on elite endurance athletes. And these athletes participate in both low and high intensity exercise. So it's kind of unclear, is their physiologic efficiency due to just the zone 2 training or the higher intensity of training that they're also doing? Additionally, these athletes are exercising greater than 20 hours per week, which is well beyond the 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise that all of the health guidelines are telling us to do. The next bit of controversy has to do with mitochondrial capacity. So a lot of studies have been saying that if you want to increase your mitochondrial efficiency and mitochondrial capacity, you need to do zone 2 exercise training. But there's some more studies that have come out that said, you may be able to do this with VO2 max as well, and being in just zone 2 might not be the right thing. And the very last argument is that, again, these are from elite athletes, all of these data points. Can we really apply this to the general population? So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into zone 2 to figure out what are the benefits and is it really the optimal zone that we need to be in if we want to lose fat. First of all, zone 2 is a great starting point. For individuals who do not regularly exercise, zone 2 is perfect for someone to come in because it is sustainable and associated with lower injury. If I have a patient who I'm trying to get them to develop the habit of exercise, I'm not going to go from you don't do any exercise at all to let's do interval sprints. That is not sustainable. The intensity is way too high for someone to be reintroduced to exercise or introduced to exercise at all. So this level of intensity is wonderful when I am trying to get people to get into the habit of exercise. That is a very practical application of zone 2, but there's also multiple physiologic benefits as well. When it comes to glucose metabolism, zone 2 training is superior to high-intensity interval training. It provides a long-term glycemic control through enhanced insulin sensitivity and more efficient non-insulin dependent glucose metabolism. Let's take a tiny step back just to cover glucose metabolism. In most physiologic states, our body pairs glucose with insulin to attach to receptors that then pull that glucose into our cell in order for us to use the glucose for energy. There is also a pathway for us to use that glucose without insulin, and zone 2 exercise makes that pathway more efficient. So, zone 2 is excellent when we are dealing with glucose metabolism and we want long-term glycemic control. You want to lower that hemoglobin A1C? Absolutely going to need to do some diet modifications, and the addition of zone 2 exercise is going to help with that goal even further. There's also some evidence that shows that zone 2 does a better job with long-term vascular adaptations. So when we're doing a high-intensity exercise, yes, we have improved blood flow to the muscles during that exercise. However, zone 2 is thought to actually increase our artery diameters when we are at rest. So that reflects improved baseline vascular tone, and that can actually help improve blood pressure. Without question, zone 2 helps us improve our endurance. We increase our skeletal muscle capillary density, we improve our cardiac output, and we enhance our ability to tolerate prolonged physical activity when we are exercising in zone 2. And as I mentioned before, zone 2 preferentially uses fat oxidation as its primary energy source, even in the non-athletes. So when we work out in zone 2 for a long period of time, we then improve our lipid metabolism over time. So where does this whole fat loss come into play when we're talking about zone 2? We first need to talk a little bit about VO2 max again in order to address this issue. VO2 max is the highest rate at which your body can consume oxygen to produce ATP. And generally, VO2 max exercise is a higher intensity. It's considered zone 5. Well, when we are working out at higher intensities, it also results in a larger caloric expenditure. This comes into play when we're trying to lose weight. So a very simplified equation is the amount of calories you take in minus your caloric expenditure is going to equal a number. Whenever that number is net negative, your body needs to tap into stored energy reserves to make up that caloric gap. Oftentimes, that's fat. So when you have this net negative caloric value, your body will then use fat to make up for that. Over time, this can lead to weight loss. Now, obviously, this is an oversimplified version. Like I said, there are multiple other factors that come into play, but I just want you to understand this as we move to the next point. Not only do we have a higher caloric expenditure with our higher intensity exercise, but we also have increased post-exercise fat oxidation. And you'll often see this abbreviated as EPOC, EPOC. This is an increased rate of fat oxidation that occurs in the hours following exercise. The magnitude of EPOC is influenced by exercise intensity and duration. So higher intensities and longer durations result in a greater EPOC compared to lower intensities and shorter durations. This is where the math kicks in. So while zone 2 utilizes fat oxidation for energy during exercise, higher intensity exercise leads to EPOC along with a potentially larger net negative caloric deficit. Together, these can produce greater reductions in fat mass, and it can do it with shorter durations of effort. So if you want to know which exercise, whether it's zone 2 or VO2 max targeted exercise, is best for fat loss, the answer is it depends. Yes, we just went through all of that for me to tell you it depends. But let me tell you why it depends, right? Because context is very relevant and we need to go through that. We can all agree that both zone 2 exercise and VO2 max level intensity exercise is going to lead to fat oxidation and fat loss. Contextual things that matter, though, is where is somebody's level of exercise to begin with? How much time do they have during the week in order to exercise? What other benefits are they looking for with exercise beyond fat loss? Every one of these factors is relevant when you want to answer the question of what is the best cardio to choose. There was a 2015 JAMA article that demonstrated a very clear dose-response relationship between physical activity and reduced all-cause mortality, with the biggest benefit in those who transitioned from a relatively sedentary lifestyle to one that even had minimal activity. This, plus the added benefit of preferential fat oxidation, intensity tolerance, and lower incidence of injury, makes zone 2 an ideal cardio for fat loss in this population of individuals. The downside of zone 2 is going to be that you're going to have to exercise for a longer period of time, which is often the rate limiting step for a lot of us when we're trying to get in a weekly amount of exercise. What I typically do is when I have patients who have really no exercise background whatsoever, we work on zone 2 intensities. I can't really give you this kind of cookbook algorithm of how I do it because every patient is different, and so this is very personalized. But what I try and do is set goals that are realistic because I want people to achieve these goals. We don't want to set insane goals that no one's going to meet and then get discouraged. So we never go from 0 to 150 minutes per week and 3 sessions and doing all of these things. It's a very gradual buildup with the ultimate goal being 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week. Throughout this process, people then start to be able to tolerate some VO2 max intensity levels. This is when we start to transition from that 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week to the 500 to 1,000 MET minutes of exercise per week. When we do the math, we can kind of pepper in those continued zone 2 workouts along with some VO2 max workouts. And the reason for this is because we need both forms of cardiovascular exercise. Zone 2 exercise is going to help our endurance, which we need. We want to make sure that we are able to endure physical activity over longer periods of time. We also have benefits of metabolic health. We talked about the glycemic control. We talked about the benefits with the vasculature. In order to improve those parameters, we need to do the zone 2 exercise. But we also need to eventually be able to get to those VO2 max workouts as well. We know with improved VO2 max, we have a lower all-cause mortality. We also know that if we want to increase our VO2 max, then we have to do VO2 max targeted training. Yes, it is true that if you do zone 2 exercise, your VO2 max will gradually improve over time. But if you do VO2 max targeted training, you're going to increase that to a much greater degree. The other advantages of VO2 max training are the epoch that we talked about, and you can work out and train for shorter durations of time. So when time is an issue, you can do a VO2 max intensity workout. So while that watch or ring may have zone 2 labeled as your fat burning zone, you are going to burn fat with either a zone 2 workout or a VO2 max workout. I think the best approach to this and to figure out which cardio workout is the best is to go through your goals. Speak with your healthcare team about what medical conditions you have. Maybe you don't have any, but then what are your long-term goals? And then come up with a workout plan that allows you to get to the point where you can do both zone 2 and VO2 max, because from a longevity standpoint, you're going to need both forms of this. They're both going to burn fat. You don't need to worry about that. The bigger concern is going to be what your body can tolerate and how your body can improve over time. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's No Filter Doctor. If you enjoyed the content, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can also go to www.thewholehumanhealthandwellbeing.com and sign up for the weekly newsletter, where you will get a link to the blog, that week's podcast, and a health tip of the week sent directly to you. It's important to know that while I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and it's not intended as medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. The information discussed should not be used to diagnose, treat, or prevent any medical condition, nor should it replace individualized medical care. If you have questions or concerns about your health, please contact your own healthcare provider. Any decisions to delay or forego a medical evaluation or treatment based on the information discussed in this podcast are made so at your own risk. My only financial disclosure is my medical practice, The Whole Human Health and Wellbeing. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week.